We can sit for those first two and wait for
I'm
everyone. Oh, go ahead, Jalen.
I'm having difficulty with my view. How do I get it in gallery view?
Oh,
If
you go
not,
your top right. You should see like 9 little cubes, like a dice with the word view next to it. Are you getting that if you put your mouse up there?
Yeah, this is actually the second time I've heard that, and I think I'm not seeing it. It's been struggling with for a while.
The top right didn't work?
No, I only have the full screen option, and then the option to make the box a little bit smaller or bigger. That's fine. It's fine. I'll work through it.
All right.
I think,
okay. Open the room now, so if everyone wants to go on mute. Okay. And Meredith, you can stay. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right, welcome everyone. I think we're going to wait 1 or 2 minutes for people to join and click through. John is kindly stewarding us through this, and I can see people coming in the waiting room right now. All right, in the interest of time, I will get started. I think we're expecting a few more people to come in. But we have 50 minutes so that people can go in a little break in between sessions. Seems like a nice idea. So I'm Meredith Benton. I'm the founder and a principal at Whistle Stop Capital. Whistle Stop Capital, for folks who don't already know me, who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, we are a consultancy, and we work with asset owners, advisors, and fund managers to help them understand material, social, and environmental risks within their investment portfolios, and to help them have conversations with their holdings about those topic areas. I'm going to start us off with some of the pure technical details for this session. If you have any connectivity problems, you probably can't hear me, but if you do, contact Victoria, VMOILAN, at ICCR.org. The session is being recorded, so if you are uncomfortable having your image or your voice on the record, make sure that you mute yourself and turn your video off. There's a recommendation that you use speaker view so that you can sort of see the people that are speaking. And if you have questions or comments, we're going to open it up to questions at the end, but you can also talk in the chat during the session. And we are lucky enough that we have John keeping us healthy in terms of our tech and IT problems. So hopefully everything will go smoothly. We'll find out in real time. So today we're talking about workplace diversity, equity and inclusion programs, and why they matter from a social justice and portfolio management perspective. We want to talk about the steps that investors are already taking. We want to help identify the resources that exist and look at where your organization might fit into the work that we're doing. I'm going to be taking notes the whole time. The goal of this is that we're going to have some real concrete next steps afterwards. I'm going to send a follow-up email to everybody who registered for the session to identify the resources that we've come up with and to share the conversation that we've had today. We are aware that so much is happening in our world, and then so much is happening in the ICCR community. There are many, many people on this session now that have been active for years around diversity, equity, inclusion. Susan Baker, Michael Passoff, Pat Tomeno, Mary Beth Gallagher, Pat Zariga, Natasha Lamb, Molly Baterne, Amy Augustine, Heidi Sumere, Sonia Dreisler, and so many more are doing good work. Right? One of the things I want to share after the session will be a Google Doc where people can put in their initiatives, what they've been working on, what the resources they have associated with that are, and then how people can get involved. So we're going to have a sort of a cheat sheet to this type of efforts. We have not yet had a call or a session, any form of collaboration from all of us in the ICCR sphere. And I think it's a really important thing for us to start doing, is to start hearing what other people are doing and really supporting each other in this work. And I know Julie's going to touch on that a little bit too. So I'm going to start with a high-level introduction on some of the statistics that we have, why this matters, from a social perspective, why this matters for your portfolio, and then I'm going to hand it off to the awesome panelists that we have to talk to us today. I'm going to start with some of the things that I think we all already know. Discrimination is pervasive in the workplace. It is extensive, and we see it across all industries. We see it across all sectors. It's not one or two companies. You cannot divest from racism in your portfolio. It's impossible. We have statistics that show that men of color at entry level, they make up about 16% of the workforce. At the executive level, they're only 9%. White women make up 31% of the entry-level workforce. At the executive level, they make up 19%. And then for women of color, the drop is most severe. They make up 17% of entry-level employees, and then only 4% of the C-suite. Right? What this turns into, what this disparity in economic opportunity means, is that people across their lifespan are unable to build equity. They have lower access to sort of anything that wealth and privilege allow you, right? Medical care, multi-generational wealth, home ownership, the ability to buy and take care of a home, the ability to help their children pay for college, right? Being seen as mentors and being able to mentor the next generation. All of this is restricted because of the lack of equality we see in the workplace. And this really matters. Like, this matters from a justice perspective, but it also, we have a very significant amount of research to say that this matters to a portfolio from an investor's perspective. We have reports from BCG, we have reports from Credit Suisse, we have reports from McKinsey, from the Wall Street Journal, from the Stanford Stanford School of Business, all of which point to the same thing. Companies outperform when they have diverse and inclusive teams. So the work that we're talking about doing today is, it's important for the world that we want to live in, and it genuinely will strengthen our portfolios, or at least the research indicates it will. So we're going to start with Julie Tanner, who many of you know. She's the managing director at CBIS, and she's going to help frame this topic out for us. After Julie, we'll move on to Carlos Rangel of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and then Jalen Spann, and I'll introduce each of them in turn. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Meredith. Julie Tanner. We're a team of 4 at Christian Brothers Investment Services. We invest for Catholic institutions around the globe, and I'm on the board of ICCR and really pleased to be talking about this critical topic. So thank you, Meredith and fellow panelists. It's interesting because Pope Francis has released the latest encyclical last week, Fratelli Tutti, meaning all brothers in Italian. And in it, he calls racism a virus that quickly mutates, and instead of disappearing, goes into hiding and lurks in waiting. And, you know, he says that instances of racism continue to shame us, where they show that our supposed social progress is not as real or as definitive as we think. And as he was writing it, he writes, that he was inspired not just by St. Francis of Assisi, but also Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, Mahatma Gandhi, and he highlights another person, Blessed Charles, a person of deep faith who made a journey of transformation towards feeling a brother to all. And that's why he named it Fratelli Tutti. And he tells us that we can all do this. We can be a universal brother by identifying with the least. He says that by identifying with the least, we come to be a brother of all. And, you know, reading that just made me think of that's what we do at ICCR. Because we know that racist acts violate justice and they're sinful, and really a failure to acknowledge the human dignity of the persons offended and recognize them as neighbors that we're taught to love. And there's another pastoral letter that was quite eloquent, talking about racism and discussing about our upbringing and culture can bring about racism unwillingly or unknowingly. This pastoral letter, Open Wide Our Hearts, it reminds us that it can lead to thoughts and actions that we don't even see as racist, but nonetheless flow from the same prejudicial root. And the cumulative effects of personal sins of racism have led to social structures of injustice and violence that makes us all accomplices in racism. You know, it goes on to work at ending racism. We need to engage the world and encounter others to see, maybe for the first time, those who are on the peripheries of our own limited view. And as investors, one way these people are seen is through data. The data that companies could provide to give investors, starting with a comprehensive breakdown of a company's workforce by race, ethnicity, gender, but more fully data that demonstrates progress, that a company is managing workplace diversity, equity, inclusion. So I'm going to make 3 points about data, do a roundup of ICCR action, because as Meredith mentioned, so much is going on. And then I'll just touch on some 4 early ways that CBIS is thinking through this issue, although much more needs to be done. And I think the first point just about the data, and we all know this because we've been working on this for so long, is how insufficient the data is. The vast majority of companies in the Russell 1000 have long ways to go when it comes to disclosing workforce demographic data that's of real value. Just Capital assessment revealed nearly 2/3 of the Russell 1000 offer no data at all on race. Less than 50 companies make public the EEO form they file to the US Equal Employment Opportunity Commission with the number of workers they have of each race and gender across 10 job categories, including senior officials, sales workers, and technicians. But we know EEO is not the holy grail. It's an excellent starting point. You know, another 200 companies do report in some way on their employees' race and gender, but using so many different formats, it makes it hard to compare the relative progress, right? So given, you know, the lack of data, it's not surprising that only 59 companies in the S&P 500 even mentioned diversity or inclusion in their executive pay plans last year, typically as a metric to which short-term incentives were tied. So this lack of data means judging companies' relative progress is very tough, right? And better disclosure would help us all measure the company's diversity and inclusion practices, better understand areas for growth, help us evaluate the performance of portfolio companies in terms of their ability to hire, retain, and promote employees of color and women, and also facilitate board oversight of the company's human capital management practices, which is just fundamental to the creation of long-term share owner value. So I was looking through some of the ICCR booklets as I was preparing for the panel, and you know, we have been working on this, and it has been such a long journey. I was looking through our own files and saw CVIS, you know, filing with Mercy Health and Adrian Dominicans and Walden and the Methodists, the Benedictines, Incarnate Word, American Friends. I was looking through the 90s. I saw, you know, resolutions we'd filed at Walgreens, Exxon, Dayton Hudson, Sprint, Eastman Kodak, Microsoft, requesting stronger diversity programs and diversity of data on ways women and people of color advance at all levels of the firm. You know, I'm reminded in 2006, the work of Barbara Ayers and Sisters of Charity at Walmart with Margie Weber, the company finally revealing how many women and people of color work for the world's largest employer. But it's not just that work, it was also all the work on discrimination that we can build on, right? Looking at programs to prohibit discrimination and lending and disclosure of the Community Reinvestment Act. I'm sure many of you have filed all these resolutions I was finding, Mellon, Northern Trust, Associates First Capital, Freddie Mac, Citigroup, working with John Lind, Passionist, Presbyterian Church, the efforts of Nora, Sisters of St. Francis of Philadelphia, with Wells Fargo and that predatory product carrying hefty fees that targeted cash-strapped low-income consumers. So this is an area we have worked on for a really long time. And, you know, I think even looking back further at the work on the Global Sullivan Principles, you know, finding resolutions in the 90s at companies at like American Cyanomed, IBM, Sterling Drug, asking them to implement the Sullivan Principles was just fascinating. This is work we have done over such a long period and have such a history from, and like those efforts where we filed on the Global Sullivan Principles, I think this is an area we can't divest from. We need to be in the boardrooms at the shareholder meeting, pressing and speaking out against discrimination and in favor of justice. It's not a problem we can divest out of, but you know, EEO data alone is not enough, right? That's the diversity of the organization, but it doesn't tell us how inclusive it is. We need inclusivity data, right? Looking at recruitment, retention, and promotion rates. So in addition to the EEO, also asking for promotion rates of diverse employees, recruitment rates of diverse employees, retention rates of diverse employees, and pay equity. Also need to be very careful. Forced arbitration, severance payouts, and NDAs make it very difficult, right, to understand corporate performance. But I think here's I come to this call to action where I feel like we have a great opportunity really to seize the day. This is a huge pivot point, and I think an opportunity because the space has opened up. Since George Floyd's murder, I don't think there was the same level of urgency or awareness, or it hasn't been this intense on this issue as I have felt it in my lifetime. So I feel that we need to press on this issue at this moment. Companies very much on the defensive, right? It's a time when nearly everyone has been issuing a statement. We've witnessed all but the smallest of the 100 firms putting out something. I think I saw Just Capital found that approximately 2/3 of America's 300 largest public companies by the size of the workforce that released a Black Lives Matter statement, only 17 released the most detailed form of demographic disclosure. Of course, this presented an opportunity. We saw Scott Stringer sweep in July. He's the comptroller in New York, and he and 3 New York City retirement systems issued a call to action on those companies that issued statements on racial equality and then did not disclose the composition of their workforce. And I was really excited to see a couple of weeks ago, he announced 34 major firms committed to disclose government workforce data, specifically calling for the consolidated EEO-1 report, which provides employment numbers for each employment category rather than the simple percentage. Companies like Goldman, Wells Fargo, General Motors, Target, BlackRock, AbbVie, Verizon, Chevron, all making these commitments. And, you know, I think this tells us it's go time. I mean, we have all these people Meredith mentioned. I mean, I'm thinking Boston Trust Walden filing for 20 years on this issue. And here we have Scott Stringer swooping in. It's time for all of us to make these kinds of advances and get this kind of reporting. We know companies are stronger and deliver better value when they're inclusive and representative. So here's a couple things we've been looking at CBIS over the past several months. Not enough. We'll be developing a dedicated approach, and I think the statement from the Racial Justice Investing Coalition was really helpful to jumpstart our thinking. Unable to sign it at this time, but I think it's an incredible show of leadership by those that have, and we'll be looking to develop something equally strategic. But the first thing we did was try to look at where we have our leverage. So the first thing we did was look at, we're manager of managers. So CBIS has 16 outside managers. So while Christian Brothers has 8 billion in assets, our managers collectively manage over 1 trillion in assets. So was there a way to amplify our message? So the team at Christian Brothers, led by my colleague Julie Frank, we worked on a process to survey our managers on their diversity and inclusion practices. That's something we can all do, reaching out to those managers. We asked them for their proxy voting guidelines and their voting records on key diversity resolutions. And then we had calls with each of them to share our concerns. And a couple good things came out right at the outset over the summer. One was one of our managers, Global Alpha, signed a new Canadian investor statement on diversity and inclusion, which is really good move, recognizing their responsibility to ensure that the persistent inequities in business and society are eliminated. So they've made some commitments. Another manager of ours, Scott, happened to mention talk to us about Fastenal. And our colleagues at As You Sow had filed at Fastenal, which is a Minnesota-based distributor of industrial and construction products with 21,000 employees. As You Sow's resolution got a vote of 61.4%, a very strong showing. And we had a call, our manager, Scott, with the CFO at Fastenal and talked to them about that resolution. We'd voted against that board 3 years in a row, asked them about their plans to implement the resolution because they hadn't disclosed anything. So we've had opportunities to work with our managers, but also we've got to be integrating this into existing engagements. So CBIS leads about 40 engagements, and this is going to be an important start for us. I mean, just as an example, Just Capital found the disclosure very low among companies in select industries, one being apparel. So CBIS leads 5 engagements in the apparel sector. We also work with ICCR and Know the Chain on a larger apparel sector work with 43 companies. So we're going to be talking to those companies, as well as CBIS has a lot of engagements thanks to Tracy Rembert's leadership on the tech sector. It's another area, while disclosure is good, we also know that some of the tech companies have intense turnover problems. Maybe no problems recruiting, but what about retention? It seems they have a revolving door. So we know in the ICCR Proxy 2020 book, I encourage everyone to take a look at it, special section on resolutions. 42 resolutions were filed last year by ICCR members on diversity and inclusiveness. Susan Baker has a little text call-out box in there, and she mentions, and I think it's clear, in some cases there has been this unprecedented level of support for diversity disclosure. We're seeing big momentum shifts in understanding the materiality of workplace equity. And Susan mentions majority vote at Newell Brands, where shareholders supported a request for assessment of and plans to expand executive leadership diversity. Related proposals for comparable data of total workforce composition at Travelers had a majority vote, near majority vote at Analog Devices, and on Juneteenth, the shareholder resolution filed by NIA Impact Capital at Fortinet had a vote of 70% investor support requesting the release of quantitative diversity data. So CBIS is going to be talking to our managers, leveraging that, integrating the issue into existing engagements. We also are working to integrate and create metrics and put them into a model to measure corporate performance and ensure that it's corporate performance on metrics that matter. And I think looking to really collaborate with everyone on this call and figure out ways we can do a better job to support all those resolutions. I mean, my vision, it would just be amazing if we could blanket corporate America with resolutions on this issue, make it a conversation in every single boardroom. I was looking through an old ICCR booklet. They were describing 1986, and it said, led by ICCR, churches and pension systems filed 185 shareholder resolutions on apartheid. On October 20th, General Motors announced it was selling South African investments, followed the next day by IBM declaring its intention to withdraw, both historic victories. The trickle of US corporations withdrawing from South Africa became a flood, with 50 US corporations leaving South Africa during 1986 alone. I'm humbled by all my colleagues that have worked on that issue, and I think we are ready to do something similar now. Dedicated action is what's needed, and we're living in an historic moment. So I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Julie. Those were really great framing comments, and I fully agree with you that this, to my mind, fits within a long history of ICCR's leadership around equity issues. I'm pleased to now turn the microphone, the Zoom screen, over to Carlos. Carlos is the Director of Investments at W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and the foundation has been very thoughtful in its own work around this topic area, and I'm very glad that he can be here to tell us what they've been doing. Carlos, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you to ICCR and especially to Meredith and Jalen for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to get to know Whistle Stop Capital, and I look forward to getting to know some of you as well through this work. So a little intro on the Kellogg Foundation. The Kellogg Foundation does about $380 million of grants per year, and the goal is to improve outcomes for children related to health, education, economic opportunities. And for children in the US, race impacts the quality of their shelter, their healthcare, their education, nutrition, and then opportunities they'll have as adults. So when we do our grants, all of our grants are done with three underlying components. There's a racial equity lens to them. There's a community engagement lens to it so that our work is relevant to the community that we're working with. And finally, there's leadership development, because every community has the seeds to its own solutions. And those are catalyzed by local leaders doing work with us and other organizations. I'm part of the investments team that manages the foundation's endowment. And if you look at our investment managers, really, that's one of our biggest vendor category spends for us as an organization. And so as we started interacting with our investment managers, we found that this group was seeing more and more demands related to diversity and inclusion from their stakeholders, be it employees, regulators, most definitely customers and clients. And so they wanted to do something about diversity, but didn't necessarily know what to do. The foundation has been doing work around diversity since the 1960s, and we ended up engaging in a conversation with our managers, seeking to do a strategy of change from within by working from the top and see how that would operate. And the work that we're doing with racial equity is when we talk to these business leaders, we tell them that they need to, first of all, make the announcement that diversity is going to be a top 3 priority for the organization. And that leads to, and then the goal is to implement a proven set of practices throughout the organization. The work that we do focuses on 4 work streams. The first one's recruitment. The second one's creating a sense of belonging. So what is the culture like? Is it inclusive? Do employees of all race, ethnicities, and genders feel respected, valued, and that they have an opportunity to thrive within the organization? The third work stream is around promotion. For promotion practices fair, and how do you document that? And also, is there a sense of sponsorship? So are employees not only being mentored, but sponsored so they have an opportunity to thrive? And finally, the fourth work stream is influence. Every organization has an opportunity to influence its ecosystem. And as Julie mentioned, there's a historic moment, and this current historic moment created an opportunity amidst all the tragedy. And we're saying that business leaders at companies want to be part of dismantling structural racism and healing its wounds. So we thought that the door was slightly open for WKKF to sort of try to help open it up in collaboration with others. And we're starting to have the conversation in C-suites and at the boardrooms. And it's up to us to really step into this room and add an equity lens to decision-making in businesses, representing the needs of children, families, and communities. So the work we're trying to do here, it will, as I mentioned to you, work in 4 different verticals. We're looking to work with about 100 companies over the next 2 years, representing over 2 million jobs. And we want to talk about recruiting, work culture, fair promotion practices, as I said, and then how do the companies show up within community. The work, to just give you a little bit of detail on that, will be, first of all, creating a data-driven national dialogue about race in the workplace. This conversation will have detailed industry information to create awareness and accountability among business leaders. We tried that within financial services. So we co-published a report with McKinsey & Company, the consulting firm, that has detailed information on retention practices and attrition, promotion rates. It also has detail about the experience of women of color in the workplace. So it does showcase the experience of Latinas, Black women, Asian women in financial services, and what the representation looks like as you look from the funnel from entry level all the way through the C-suite. So that's freely available on the internet. I'm happy to share the link with you. And the second thing we'll do, we found out that was a very effective way to start a conversation. And so now we're moving on to other sectors to talk about that while continuing to stay on financial services. The second piece of work that we did is engaging companies to create a willingness and an urgency to act. So we're working closely with them in cohort models. And what we do is we sign up companies to work with us for a full year. There's a quarterly workshop. The first one is about creating an assessment of each specific company, and also about developing a vision for the organization when it comes to diversity and inclusion. The remainder of the workshops are about execution. So the second one will be about creating a blueprint and an architecture to really move forward that vision that was developed in the first. And what we found is there are champions within each organization to want to push and advocate for change, but it's about creating a coalition within each organization that wants to move the work forward because there's fear about what does this do for the business. The third work stream, as I mentioned to you, will now be about talent pipeline. So we want to connect attractive job opportunities for college students and mid-career professionals from underrepresented groups with companies that we're having conversations with. So to be able to move this forward, we plan to work with over 50 different universities, many of them HBCUs or Hispanic serving institutions and even Native serving institutions, as well as with top-tier recruiting firms and pipeline programs. And the fourth part is building up an ecosystem. So we want to amplify impact by bringing other actors such as foundation, college endowments, other managers of managers, public pension plans and consultants, as well as think tanks, because we don't have the ultimate answer to this. This is really a work of a community, and we just want to be a catalyst and provide a placeholder for organizations to come work with us on this. Meredith, back to you.
Thank you so much, Carlson. I'm so glad that you could join us for this. This is an issue area where I see the work that ICCR does, the work that's coming from the foundation community, all working in concert to support each other and to really build on the work, the research that's being done. It's really phenomenal what's coming out of the Kellogg Foundation. Thank you for your leadership there. Yeah. I'm going to move now. Actually, I'm going to pause. I'm going to make a comment around the chat box. So the ideal, right, is that at the end of this session, there will be a few ideas that you hear or that you see on the chat box that really resonates. You think that's a great idea, or in some way this can complement the work I'm doing. So please, everyone who is doing work now, we know that so many people are, if you'll put that information into the chat box to allow others to see it. We couldn't possibly cover it all in a 50-minute Zoom session. I'm going to capture all that and share it out in the notes later. Work that you're doing, work that you know of others doing, resources that you're aware of, things that would allow us to sort of to create the grocery store around this topic area. With that, I'm really pleased to be able to now share the spotlight with Jalen Spann, a colleague of mine at Whistle Stop Capital. Jalen is going to talk to you about some of the activities and resources that we're aware of or that we may have been involved in directly. Thanks so much, Jalen.
Thank you, Meredith. Hi, everyone. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me fine. Am I coming in okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just go ahead and introduce a little bit about myself. My name is Jalen Spann. I actually work with Meredith, like she said, at Whistle Stop. I do research and business development. So some of my duties entail conducting hours of research for our clients and doing really deep dives into the companies and our clients' holdings, as well as the S&P 500, which we know is constantly changing. So this is something I do on a pretty regular basis. I also help out with our shareholder engagement work and help investors do their due diligence when it comes to their portfolio companies. So like Meredith mentioned, I'm going to be sharing some of the findings from the research that we've been partnering with As You Sow to gather, and how we're hoping this data will help shed some light on the lack of consistent, comparable data that's being put out there, or lack thereof, I should say. So currently we are working on a benchmark study of the S&P 500 with our client As You Sow. We've compiled data from the first 100 companies that we finished assessing, and the findings are already very interesting, to say the least. We are tracking a number of different metrics to help investors get a better sense of how employees are moving through the organization, as well as identifying any gaps or disparities that there may be. Workforce data is something that we look at, like my other panelists have touched on, and we found that out of the first 100 companies that we've gone through, 77 of them actually report their workplace comp data on some level. I will add that the level of work disclosure definitely varies. I've seen data that tracks only the percentage of men and women in the organization. I've seen some companies break it down by gender as well as ethnicity or age group. I've seen companies rely solely on the EEO1 subcategories as a guide. So, because of all of this, comparability can be really challenging, and it makes it difficult to suggest best practices when there isn't really a standard to look to. In addition to looking at workforce comp, we also check to see if they've been publicly releasing their EEO1 data. And already 35 of the 100 were found to release that data. And this is especially important, like Julia mentioned earlier, because requiring companies to submit their EEO1 data forces there to be a certain threshold of transparency across all industries, but it does very little good if that data is not required to be made public. And, we need this data in order to advocate for certain D&I programs and, find out what initiatives are actually effective. So we also took a look at inclusion metrics, like promotion, recruitment, and retention. Each category broken into subcategories of race and gender. And in these findings, we found that 15 companies actually released promotion by gender, 2 released promotion by race, 20 companies released recruitment by gender, 3 released it by race, and 11 companies released retention by gender, and 3 companies released retention by race. Now, promotion, recruitment, and retention data really speak to the inclusion aspect of D&I, because these 3 metrics highlight not just what the workforce looks like, but what's happening within that workforce. How are companies ensuring that marginalized employees are able to thrive and connect with their colleagues? Are employees of color receiving promotions at the same rate as their white colleagues? What is the recruitment process that the company follows to ensure the most qualified and diverse talent pool? Are people of color staying with the company, or are they leaving after years? So, and these inclusion factors matter if investors want the full picture as to what's happening in their portfolio. So we also track this data by sectors as well, and found that the consumer staples, finance, communication services, and IT sectors had the highest average reporting of any data. And financial and consumer staples specifically came in the top 2 as far as reporting goes. And in these findings as well, we've been seeing that, and this touches on Julia's point, but there's far more reporting on gender than there is on race. So there's definitely a comfortability in releasing the numbers around, women within the organization than there is releasing the number of, people, the people of color. So these are just some of our initial findings of the first 100. We're about midway through the S&P 500 and should have the S&P 250 research live on ASUSO's website in the next 2 weeks. If anybody was interested in checking out this study, like Meredith said, she's going to be having a bunch of resources to send out after the fact, so just be on the lookout for that. And apart from this study with ASUSO, we are also partnered with NIA Impact Capital. And through them, we had a resolution go to vote at a company called Fortinet. And Julia touched on this earlier as well, but it called on them to release an annual report assessing the company's D&I efforts. And this resolution actually passed with 70% in favor, which, is an incredibly high level of investor support, especially from a very small, tech company with no real substantive concerns or overly egregious practices, which is really an indicator of the culture shift that's currently taking place, where you have investors wanting that disclosure and transparency, and directors being pressured by the current racial climate to do more than just, donate to anti-racist organizations or attempt to further invest in the Black community, but also to take a look within their own company and really use this time to make a meaningful difference. So since this vote at Fortinet, we've actually, we've actually noticed a major difference in our shareholder engagement conversations. So the tone has really shifted from why does any of this research matter to us, to now it being, what are some best practices that we should follow, and what resources are there to help us address this concern. Since then, one of the more well-known tech companies who up until now has been extremely reluctant to release any workforce comp or pay equity data, has also made a commitment to release their EEO1 data form that now puts them in the same playing field as their peers who have already been doing so. So we also currently have an outstanding resolution at Procter & Gamble that goes to vote next week, asking for the same annual report on their D&I efforts that we asked of for Fortinet. And we're hoping to see continued increasing investor support with this vote. We don't have the vote yet, but the way the companies responded since the proxy went to vote, by releasing significant amounts of additional data and an amended proxy statement, further pushing back against the resolution, it all indicates that there's a very strong level of investor support there, which is great specifically for P&G, since, we filed the resolution in the first place due to the overly overt focus on diversity and racial equality in their advertising, while on the back end not divulging any of their workforce comp or pay equity or inclusion metrics for their employee workforce. We've definitely seen that companies have been more welcoming to sit down at the table with us, and because of that, we were able to withdraw all but 2 of the shareholder resolutions that we filed. And this is something to pay attention to, because all of these outcomes are little glimpses into what investors find material. And, investors are going to be expecting this quick change from companies. So the expectation is there. We just need, a greater body of advocates to help push it forward. So I would like to wrap up with, some tangible action items for, anybody who's on the call, who's heard some of the stats today and some of the things that we've touched on and are wondering how they can continue to be advocates and how they can help. So during the summer of 2019, Whistle Stop actually collaborated with ASUSO in facilitating an investor statement calling for greater corporate transparency on D&I efforts. The statement focused on investors' needs for greater corporate reporting of key data on this material workplace issue. So far, over 101 investors have signed the statement. That number could be a little bit more now. And we're just shy of about $2 trillion in assets under management. And the current signatory list includes public funds, advisors, foundations, and religious organizations. So As You Sow has actually now reopened the investor statement to signatories. And like I said, if your organization would like to add its voice in support of increased corporate reporting of this data, if it has not done so already, then definitely be on the lookout for this statement within the email of resources that Meredith will send out afterward. This is an important time for companies to hear from investors on the need for quantitative data that will allow us to not only assess but compare the effectiveness of their workplace equity programs. So again, Meredith will be sending out more on this afterward. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it back to her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jalen, and for that overview of some of the resources that exist. We would love to have anyone who is not yet on that investor statement obviously join on. We have a whopping 6 minutes for questions, but we would really love, to the extent possible, to hear some additional voices. You can either raise a digital hand and John will unmute you, or you can write your question into the chat box and we can answer it in that way. I don't know if I can tell if there are questions or not, John. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I'm able to know, but please, folks, speak up. We know so much more work is happening, and I could see in the chat that there were some things that people wanted to add. So this would be a great time to speak them to the group. Okay, there's a raise hand function. Where that function is, I'm not clear. You could raise your physical hand and we could see you. That's the other option.
Hey Meredith, it's Anita. I'm just looking at the group chat and there were a couple of questions, so I'm just going to read them out, all right?
Yeah.
Does SASB include relevant data points? That was one question. I'm going to keep running through it, but I thought maybe you can answer them in the meanwhile.
Yeah, I think that, like many other times where we see rising issues, the standards take a little while to catch up. So we're not seeing the level of content requested that we need. Julie and Jalen both mentioned, and Carlos actually mentioned, promotion, recruitment, and retention data being essential to understand inclusion, and we're not seeing that in there.
There aren't any more questions, so that was it.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. Would anyone like to add a comment then or speak to their own work? I know there are many on this call who have been doing quite a lot. I'll call on people. I was going to say, Kristen, I can see you, and Mary Beth, I can see both of your faces. If you guys want to each take a minute or two to speak. Yeah, Mary Beth, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Carlos, I really appreciated your comments, and we had a session right before this on the racial justice investing statement, and a lot of folks shared that part of the reason they didn't feel they could do more racial justice work was because of their own organization's lack of diversity or commitment. So I saw in the chat you shared your HR toolkit, but I think that it would be worth having like just more discussion on that point, because it's one thing to turn the lens internally and another to look externally. Both are obviously critical, but really appreciate the work you did there, Carlos, and for sharing those resources.
Thank you. Thank you. I would agree. It's hard because it's very nuanced, right? Every organization is different and it's difficult to drive it, but there are some common themes that can be addressed as well. So thank you.
I'm happy to share a little bit if that's helpful.
You want to talk about the arbitration work? It's something I was thinking about.
Sure. So, well, just that with Meredith and Jalen, we have approached all of our company holdings across our 6 solution themes, which line up with the UN SDGs, and so, and particularly concentrating on diversity and inclusion efforts. And just as Jalen mentioned, the conversation really is shifting, and the conversations are happening. And of course, you might have read that we took on Tesla with forced arbitration. And what's fascinating there is it's such an interesting company in that, it very much is still bro culture. And yet we now have we got 27% of the vote, which we found to be significant on a first try. And given that Elon on any given day owns 19% of the company, so we felt like we're getting some significant share. And they're not in the S&P, so not everyone does own Tesla. Now we're having employee groups reach out to us for support. And so we are seeing that this conversation can happen at any level, and it can happen, I think, one conversation at a time. We're really making a difference. And so to have a conversation with all of us together and then seeing what all of our voices can do, I'm really excited about that. I do see the heavy lift is on investors and on us to educate employees, even HR and IR representatives don't seem to understand the issues and the links with forced arbitration, with both sexual harassment and racial discrimination. And so that is, I think the lift is on us to connect those dots. And yet that, in association with asking for diversity reports and just best practices for inclusion, I think is a really interesting lens to be working right now. And just as Julie said, the time is now. We're getting up to 9, 11 people on a call, and they're interested to learn from us on best practices. And so I think most corporations actually are listening, which is exciting.
Thanks, Kristen. And then I do see we're at the time, but I see Eric does have a hand up. So Eric, you get to be last comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Meredith, this is all, and I really appreciated the history of ICCR and all of the work that ICCR over the years. I mean, it's just been phenomenal. I had the pleasure of working with Gary Browse, who used to be the director of the equality program, and I've been working with ICCR for 20 years. The only comment that I would make is that I think that the data and analytics is great. So, of course, you have Sustainalytics, you have Morningstar Minority Empowerment Index, and you got all these indexes. Bloomberg has index, Reuters. But I think you have to go beyond just the data. I think the data is just a start. The important part of it is the engagement with the company, and I think that. And I can tell, and I worked in the civil rights community, they're just so disconnected from this work. It's ridiculous. They have no idea, but yet and still, when you think about the NAACP Fair Share Program, it's just, and from talking to the leadership, having this alliance with a coalition like this, a lot of those initiatives were packed with corporations in order to advance the economic interests of communities of color would have been strengthened by this work. But there's kind of a split between the traditional civil rights community tactically along with this work. And I think that has to be bridged. Without that, what you'll find is that corporations will go, and if you engage with them, they're going to call the traditional civil rights organizations that they have relationships with and say that investor voices like this is not important because I have a relationship with the Rainbow Coalition, or I have a relationship with this organization, and a lot of those organizations are really ill-informed, about this work and how it could strengthen the missions that they have in terms of bringing about corporate change. So I just wanted to share that, and I think that's a very, very important point.
Yeah, Eric, thank you for that point. I'm so sorry that we're at the time. I think this is the beginning of a much longer conversation that ICCR should be having. I want to thank Julie and Jalen and Carlos for coming on as our panelists today. And I want to thank everyone who attended and listened and are or will be participating in this work in the future. Thank you all so much.